I never imagined I'd be standing here, in front of this extravagant high-rise, its glass windows gleaming under the golden city lights. The entrance was adorned with towering floral arrangements, and the guests stepping out of luxury vehicles were dressed in their finest. Women in shimmering gowns, men in tailored tuxedos, all laughing, mingling, living in a world of status and power. And here I was, invited to a wedding I had no business attending. Claudia's wedding. My ex-wife. For years, I had pushed her out of my mind, letting time and distance erase the bitter ending we had shared. I had moved on, or at least that's what I had convinced myself. But then, the invitation arrived, handwritten, elegant, deliberate. The moment I saw the familiar curve of her script, I felt something stir deep inside me. I hope you'll attend. That was all she had written. No explanation, no unnecessary pleasantries. Just those 4 words, weighted with meaning. I should have ignored it. But curiosity has a way of dragging a man into places he knows he shouldn't go. So, I came. Stepping inside the grand ballroom was like walking into another lifetime. The chandeliers hung like cascading crystals, illuminating the marble floors beneath my feet. Waiters glided through the room carrying glasses of champagne, and a live orchestra played a soft melody that melted into the air like silk. It was a world Claudia had always wanted. A world she had built for herself, far removed from the life we once shared. I kept to the shadows, unnoticed. At least, until I saw him. Richard, the man who had taken my place. I knew of him. How could I not? A finance mogul, one of the elite. A man whose face graced business magazines alongside my ex-wife's. He stood at the center of the crowd, basking in admiration, his arm possessively wrapped around Claudia's waist. And then his eyes locked onto me. For a moment, I thought he might ignore me, pretend I didn't exist, as if I were nothing more than a ghost from Claudia's past. But instead, he smirked, that condescending kind of smile men like him reserved for people they believed were beneath them. He leaned in close, his voice a quiet sneer. "You're a middle school dropout, right?" I stilled. "Why don't you do yourself a favor and cut ties with my wife?" The audacity. I slowly turned my gaze to meet his, studying the arrogance in his expression, the way his lips curled with satisfaction as if he expected me to shrink under his words. He had no idea who he was speaking to. I could have reacted, could have let my pride force me into a confrontation. But instead, I merely smiled, a knowing, amused kind of smile. Because if Richard thought I was a mere dropout, a forgotten footnote in Claudia's story, then he was in for a surprise he'd never see coming. There was a time when Claudia and I were inseparable. We weren't always these people. Her, the untouchable CEO of a major bank, and me, the man she had long left behind. There was a time when she looked at me the way a person looks at their world, with love, admiration, and a belief that together we could conquer anything. We met as teenagers, 2 people from vastly different backgrounds. Claudia had always been driven, her mind wired for ambition, for control, for calculated steps that would take her where she wanted to go. I, on the other hand, never cared for rules, for institutions, for paths that had been carved out by others. My heart belonged to music, to the piano, to the melodies that spoke louder than words ever could. Back then, she loved that about me. She would sit beside me on the piano bench, watching as my fingers danced across the keys, her head resting on my shoulder as I composed songs just for her. She told me my music made her feel alive, that it was the one thing in her structured world that felt unpredictable, real. "You don't have to follow their rules," I had told her once. "You can just live." She had smiled, a rare, soft smile that she only ever showed when it was just the 2 of us. I want the best for us. At the time, I believed her. But as the years passed, her love for my music turned into something else, something resentful, something disapproving. "You can't just live on music alone," she would say, frustration creeping into her voice. "What kind of life is that?" To her, stability was everything. A future needed to be built, not left to chance. And in her mind, my refusal to conform, to chase promotions and degrees, meant that I had no future at all. At first, the changes were subtle, Little comments here and there, gentle nudges to think about my future, to consider something more stable. But soon, it became a divide too wide to ignore. I remember the night it all came to a head. We were in our small apartment, the one we had moved into after college, the one where I had spent nights composing while she buried herself in business textbooks. She had come home late, her expression unreadable, her posture tense. "We need to talk," she had said. I already knew what was coming. "This isn't working." I had simply nodded. There was no yelling, no pleading, no desperate attempts to make her stay. I could see it in her eyes. She had already decided. She left, and I let her go. And so Claudia climbed the corporate ladder, and I disappeared into my music, traveling from city to city, performing in jazz bars, on street corners, in grand halls. She built her empire, and I built mine. But the difference was, mine didn't need validation. Years passed. She became powerful, influential, a name that commanded respect. And I became something she never saw coming. And now, here we were. Her wedding. Her perfect world. And yet, for some reason, she had invited me. I looked around the ballroom, at the crystal chandeliers, at the towering floral centerpieces, at the people dressed in wealth and status. This was her world now. Why did you even come? I turned at the sound of the voice and found Marcus, Claudia's younger brother, standing beside me. Unlike his sister, Marcus had never judged me. If anything, he had admired my music, often sneaking into my performances just to listen. "Curiosity, I suppose," I replied with a smirk. Marcus exhaled, shaking his head. "Richard's an idiot. He doesn't know who you are, does he?" "No," I said simply. Marcus gave a half-laugh. "You could ruin him in a second, and he doesn't even know it." I shrugged. "That's the fun part." Just then, Richard's voice rang out again, louder this time, directed at me. "Why is someone like you even here? This event is for people of status." I turned my head slowly, meeting his gaze. He was enjoying this moment of superiority, this belief that he had won something, that I was nothing. I could have responded, could have humbled him with a few well-placed words. But instead, I simply chuckled, because this man had no idea who he had just insulted, and soon he would learn. The reception hall was grand, designed for people who lived their lives in the upper echelons of society. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling, refracting golden light across tables set with silk napkins and polished silverware. A string quartet played in the background, the kind of elegant, restrained music that fit perfectly with Claudia's world. I took a sip of my drink, not particularly interested in the fine whiskey they were serving. Around me, conversations buzzed about stock markets, high-profile mergers, and political influence. This wasn't my world, and I had no desire to belong to it. Yet, despite that, I was here. I should have left the moment Richard threw his little insult my way. I had nothing to prove, nothing to gain from staying. But something about this moment, about standing in a room full of people who thought they knew everything, kept me rooted in place. And then, I saw him. Marcus. Unlike Claudia, Marcus had never let social status dictate his relationships. He had always been more open-minded, more genuine. He was a man who, despite his success as an investment analyst, still valued the simple things. We had met years ago, back when Claudia and I were still together. He was younger, still finding his way, and for some reason, he had gravitated toward me, intrigued by the way I lived. Where Claudia had seen irresponsibility, Marcus had seen freedom. He would sneak into my performances, absorbing the music as if it spoke to him in ways numbers and financial reports never could. And now, here he was, standing in front of me, shaking his head with a wry smile. "I told Claudia she shouldn't have invited you if Richard was going to act like that," he said, his voice low so only I could hear. "Let them have their moment," I replied, unaffected. "This is their night, after all." Marcus snorted. "That's generous of you. He doesn't deserve it, though. You know that, right?" I knew, but it wasn't my problem. Richard, however, was still enjoying his little power trip. "Why is someone like you even here?" he called out again, his voice deliberately loud enough for people nearby to hear. "This event is for people of status." I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze. Around him, guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing the hostility in his words. But Richard didn't care. He was too drunk on his own arrogance to notice. I chuckled, a quiet, amused sound that made his brow furrow. "What's funny?" he demanded, taking a step closer. "Nothing," I replied smoothly. "I just find it interesting how people assume status is defined by the clothes you wear, the title on your business card, or the weight of your bank account." Richard scoffed. "That's because it is. And you? You're just some nobody my wife made the mistake of inviting." His words were designed to sting, to put me in my place. But I didn't react the way he wanted. Instead, I just smiled. Because in that moment, I realized something. Richard had no idea who I was. And neither did Claudia. I had spent years building a life outside of their world, away from corporate skyscrapers and high society gatherings. I had poured my soul into my music, traveled the world, performed in places they would never step foot in. I had built something for myself, something real, something lasting. And yet, in their eyes, I was still the same man Claudia had walked away from all those years ago. That was the real joke. Marcus, standing beside me, smirked as if he could read my thoughts. "You really don't know who he is, do you?" he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Richard to hear. Richard frowned, his bravado faltering for the first time. "What the hell are you talking about?" I could have told him. I could have let him in on the truth right then and there. But where was the fun in that? Instead, I just took another sip of my drink and turned away, letting Richard stew in his own ignorance. Because soon enough, he was going to find out exactly who I was. And when that moment came, it would be his world that shattered. I wasn't always the man standing in this lavish ballroom, exchanging smug glances with men like Richard. There was a time when my name meant nothing, when my pockets were empty, and when Claudia looked at me as if I were a burden rather than a partner. I had grown up in a world where money was plentiful, where my father's name carried weight in boardrooms and business circles. But that world collapsed overnight. One bad investment, one wrong decision, and everything was gone. The grand estate we once lived in, sold to pay off debts. The expensive cars, repossessed before we could even adjust to the reality of being broke. My father was never the same after that. I remember the morning I woke up to find him sitting in the kitchen, staring at nothing, a cup of untouched coffee in his trembling hands. He had built an empire and lost it all, and in his eyes, I saw a man who had no idea how to live outside of wealth. But I was different. I wasn't tied to the stock market, to the endless pursuit of status, to the belief that life's value was measured in dollars. What I had, what no financial collapse could ever take away, was my music. Even after we moved into a tiny apartment, stripped of every luxury, I didn't care. I had my old keyboard, a set of worn-out headphones, and an imagination that never stopped creating melodies. That was when I met Marcus. I had been playing in the school music room, my fingers gliding over the keys, lost in a song I hadn't even realized I was composing. The door creaked open, and I glanced up to see a younger boy standing in the doorway, eyes wide with awe. "That was incredible," he had said. We became friends almost instantly. Marcus had always admired my music. He would sneak into rehearsals, watching me play, asking endless questions about how I composed, how I turned emotions into sound. He was still a teenager, but even then, he had the sharp mind of a businessman. "You could make money from this," he told me once. Real money. I laughed at the idea. Back then, I wasn't thinking about fame or fortune. I just wanted to play. Then Claudia entered my life. She was everything I wasn't. Structured, disciplined, always chasing the next goal. At first, she admired my free spirit. She would sit beside me while I played, listening with a dreamy look in her eyes. But admiration slowly turned into frustration. "You need a plan," she would say. "You can't just play music forever and hope life works out." She wanted me to be something I wasn't. I didn't argue. I didn't try to change her mind. I just let her go. While she climbed the corporate ladder, I packed my bags and traveled. I played in jazz clubs, on street corners, in underground bars where people weren't looking for the next big thing. They just wanted to feel something real. And that was what my music did. It reached people. It spoke to them in ways words never could. I never cared about money, but money came anyway. I built a name for myself, not in boardrooms or skyscrapers, but in concert halls, in viral videos that racked up millions of views. My fan base spanned the globe, yet I never flaunted my success. And now, I was standing in Claudia's world once again, watching as her new husband sneered at me, completely oblivious to the fact that the middle school dropout he was mocking could buy and sell his entire empire 10 times over. Richard didn't know, but Marcus did. He stood beside me, his expression unreadable as he watched Richard dig himself deeper into his own arrogance. "You really don't know who he is, do you?" Marcus finally said, his voice calm, but laced with amusement. Richard turned to him with a frown. "What the hell are you talking about?" I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. "Nothing," I said, taking another sip of my drink. "Enjoy your night." And with that, I turned away, leaving Richard stewing in his own ignorance. Because soon enough, he was going to find out exactly who I was. And when that moment came, the look on his face would be worth every second of this ridiculous night. The wedding ceremony had ended, and now the reception was in full swing. Guests clinked their champagne glasses, murmuring about business deals and luxury vacations while the orchestra played an elegant tune in the background. The waitstaff moved seamlessly between the tables, refilling drinks, offering delicately plated hors d'oeuvres, and ensuring that every guest's experience was nothing short of perfection. I had remained on the sidelines for most of the night, an outsider in a world I had deliberately left behind. But Claudia, always so careful about appearances, made her way toward me at last. She looked exactly as I remembered her, elegant, poised, the very definition of success. The gown she wore was an extension of that image, fitted to perfection, expensive enough to make a statement without seeming excessive. She stopped in front of me, hesitation flickering in her eyes. "You came," she said softly, as if she hadn't expected me to. I did. For a moment, she seemed unsure of what to say. Maybe she was wondering why I accepted the invitation in the first place. Maybe she wanted to know what I had been doing all these years. Or maybe she was simply realizing that I wasn't the same man she had left behind. Before she could say another word, he stepped in. Richard, the man who had spent the entire evening trying to belittle me, as if doing so would cement his own superiority. His arm wrapped around Claudia's waist, his grip firm, possessive. "Listen, drop out," he scoffed, his voice laced with arrogance. "My wife doesn't need someone like you lingering around. Cut ties and move on." It was almost comical. The way he stood there, so assured of his dominance, so convinced that I was nothing more than a footnote in Claudia's past. I let out a breath, shaking my head slightly. "All right," I said, pulling my phone out of my pocket. "I'll start by closing my $700 million account at your bank." The moment the words left my mouth, the air in the ballroom seemed to shift. Everything, every conversation, every clink of a champagne glass, every note from the orchestra, seemed to pause all at once. The people around us turned their heads, their expressions a mixture of shock and disbelief. But the best reaction came from Richard himself. His smirk faltered. His confidence wavered. "What?" he stammered, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. I glanced at Claudia, who had gone pale, her grip tightening around the stem of the champagne glass in her hand. "You heard me," I said casually, tilting my head. "I'm withdrawing my $700 million. Your wife is the CEO. She can handle it, right?" Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room but chokes it. Marcus, who had been quietly watching from the sidelines, let out a low whistle, shaking his head in amusement. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. I turned my gaze back to Richard, who was struggling to process what had just happened. His hands twitched at his sides, his jaw tightening, his entire demeanor shifting from arrogance to outright panic. "You're lying," he finally said, but there was no conviction behind his words. Claudia, however, wasn't as quick to dismiss me. She reached out, grabbing my wrist, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're joking, right?" There was something in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Fear. Not the fear of losing me. The fear of losing what I represented. I shrugged. slipping my phone back into my pocket. Why would I joke? I said lightly. Your husband wanted me gone. I'm just making it easier. The color drained from Richard's face. He turned sharply to Claudia, his voice breaking as he demanded, This is a joke, right? This guy doesn't have that kind of money. But before Claudia could respond, Marcus, who had been enjoying the scene far too much, let out a chuckle, shaking his head. You really don't know who he is, do you? Richard's eyes darted between Marcus and Claudia, his panic growing by the second. I could see it, the realization creeping in, the weight of his mistake settling heavily on his shoulders. And for the first time that night, he wasn't the one in control. I turned to leave, fully prepared to walk away and let them deal with the aftermath of their own arrogance. But just as I took a step forward, Richard grabbed my arm. Wait. I pulled my arm free, meeting his desperate gaze with an impassive stare. You made your point, he said, his voice unsteady. You're obviously successful. There's no need to. I cut him off with a simple tilt of my head. No need to what? I asked. Show you what happens when you underestimate people? Richard swallowed hard. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the frantic way his mind was scrambling for a way to salvage the situation. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough so that only he could hear. Next time, I murmured, be careful who you look down on. And with that, I turned away, leaving him standing there, speechless, humiliated, and fully aware that he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The night was far from over, but one thing was certain. I had already won. The weight of my words hung heavy in the air, thickening the atmosphere of the once lavish celebration. The clinking of glasses had stopped, the hum of casual conversation replaced with stunned silence. Eyes darted toward Claudia, toward Richard, toward me. The dropout, the nobody, the man who was supposed to be insignificant. Except now, I wasn't. Now, I was the only person in this room who mattered. Claudia's grip on my wrist tightened, her fingers cold against my skin. I could see the panic blooming in her eyes, the careful facade of composure she had perfected over the years cracking at the edges. You're joking, right? She whispered again, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. Claudia had always been meticulous, always in control. Every move she made was calculated, deliberate. But this was the first time I had ever seen her rattled. I let out a quiet chuckle. Why would I joke? I said smoothly, slipping my wrist free from her grasp. Your husband wanted me gone. I'm just making it easier. Richard finally snapped out of his stunned silence, shaking his head as if trying to shake off reality itself. His hands curled into fists at his sides, and for a moment, I almost thought he might try something stupid. This is ridiculous, he muttered under his breath before turning sharply to Claudia. Tell me this isn't real. Tell me he doesn't have that kind of money. But Claudia couldn't say anything, because she already knew the truth. She had always assumed she knew who I was. That when she left me behind, she had moved on to something better. And yet, here she was, realizing that I had become something far beyond what she could have imagined. Marcus, who had been watching the entire exchange with barely concealed amusement, finally let out a chuckle, shaking his head. You really don't know who he is, do you? He said, looking at Richard like he was the biggest idiot in the room. Richard turned to him, his face a mask of frustration. What the hell are you talking about? Marcus smirked. You should probably Google him. That was all it took. Within seconds, whispers rippled through the room, fingers tapping on phone screens as people looked me up. And then, just like that, the shift happened. I could feel it. The weight of 100 pairs of eyes flickering between me and the glowing screens in their hands. The slow realization washing over them. The collective gasp that followed. Someone near the back of the room exhaled a sharp breath. No way. Another voice, barely above a whisper. Wait, he's... Richard snatched Claudia's phone from her hands, his eyes scanning the screen, his expression twisting into something between shock and dread. And then, finally, the moment I had been waiting for. His hands shook, his confidence, so unwavering, so absolute, shattered. I watched as reality sank in, as he pieced together every mistake he had made tonight. Because now, he knew. I wasn't just some washed-up nobody from Claudia's past. I wasn't a dropout. I wasn't a failure. I was one of the most renowned pianists in the world. A musician with an audience of millions. A net worth that far surpassed his own. And the worst part? I had never needed to flaunt it. Richard's jaw clenched so tight, I thought he might break his teeth. He turned back to Claudia, his face ashen. "Did you know?" he demanded. Claudia didn't answer. Because she didn't have one. She had left me behind all those years ago, certain that I would amount to nothing. She had assumed that, without her, I would fade into obscurity. And now, at her own wedding, in front of everyone she respected, she was being forced to face the truth. Richard took a shaky breath, his mind undoubtedly scrambling for a way to fix this. "Look," he started, his voice low, measured. "There's no need to be rash. Let's just—" I raised a brow. "Rash?" He swallowed. "I'm just saying maybe we should talk. You don't actually have to close your account. I mean, let's be reasonable here." I studied him for a long moment. A part of me considered dragging this out, watching him squirm a little longer. But then I decided I was already bored. I turned my attention back to Claudia. "It's funny," I mused, "how things work out, isn't it?" She didn't answer. Couldn't. Because she knew that, no matter how much power or status she had built for herself, no matter how far ahead she had thought she had lost. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I had plotted some elaborate scheme to humiliate her. But because life had a way of evening things out. And tonight, fate had decided to settle the score. I turned away from them, stepping toward the exit, but Richard called after me one last time. "Wait, you're not actually closing your account, are you?" I smirked, not bothering to look back. "I'll think about it." And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a wedding that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. I stepped out of the ballroom, but the echoes of the stunned silence behind me followed like an unspoken chorus. The night air was crisp against my skin as I moved toward the grand staircase leading down to the courtyard, my every step measured, deliberate. This wasn't how I had imagined the night going. Then again, I hadn't expected much when I first opened Claudia's invitation. I had assumed she sent it out of obligation, or maybe to prove something to herself, that she had moved on, that she had one. But now, I wasn't so sure, because the way she had looked at me back there, that wasn't the look of a woman who felt victorious. That was the look of a woman who had realized too late that she had miscalculated everything. The breeze carried the muffled hum of voices from inside, the party still continuing despite the tension that had fractured the perfect illusion. I could only imagine the whispers spreading now, the quiet conversations picking apart the moment they had all witnessed firsthand. I had spent years living outside of their world, and yet, in the span of one evening, I had somehow managed to redefine my presence within it. I reached the bottom of the steps, planning to call for a car when I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Wait," I sighed before I even turned around. I already knew who it was. Claudia. She stood at the top of the stairs, her silhouette framed against the golden lights of the ballroom entrance. The way she held herself was the same as always, poised, elegant, still in control even when everything around her was falling apart. Except now, I could see the cracks. For the first time since I had arrived, she wasn't performing for an audience. She wasn't the unshakable CEO, the woman who had orchestrated this perfect evening. Right now, she was just Claudia, the same woman I had once shared late-night conversations with, the same woman who had once curled up beside me as I played the piano, letting my music lull her to sleep, the same woman who had walked away. I didn't move as she descended the stairs, her steps slower now, more hesitant. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quieter than before. "There's nothing left to say," I replied evenly. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe I was actually walking away from this. "I was wrong about you," she admitted, and I caught the slight tremor in her voice. "About everything." I let out a humorless chuckle, glancing up at the sky. The city lights flickered in the distance, the skyline an endless sprawl of glass and steel. Everything she had built her life around. "What part?" I asked, finally looking at her. The part where you assumed I'd never be anything? Or the part where you thought I'd always be there, waiting for you to realize your mistake? She flinched. Good. Because the truth had always been simple. She had never believed in me. Not really. She had loved me, once. But even back then, that love had always been conditional, hinged on the idea that one day I would change, that I would wake up and suddenly decide to chase the kind of success she valued. And when I didn't, she left. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. That's the problem, isn't it? I said, tilting my head. You never asked. You never cared to know. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her fingers curling into the fabric of her wedding dress. You have no idea how many times I thought about calling you, she finally admitted. About asking if what? I interrupted. If I had changed? If I had finally become the person you wanted me to be? She swallowed hard. I took a step closer, my voice calm but firm. Claudia, you didn't leave me because I had no ambition. You left me because I refused to chase the kind of ambition you respected. Her breath hitched. And that's okay, I continued. You made your choice and I made mine. The difference is, I never regretted mine. Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. She had spent years convincing herself that she had moved on, that her life was better without me, that she had everything she ever wanted. But now, on her wedding night, she was standing in front of me, struggling to find the words to justify her choices. She started, then sighed. I just wanted to know if you were happy. I smiled then, small, knowing. I was happy the moment I stopped needing your approval. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to respond, but nothing came out. There it was, the truth she had never considered, the realization that I had never been waiting for her to realize her mistake, that I had never needed closure, because I had already moved past it long before she had. And that was the real loss. Not that she had left me, but that when she looked at me now, she knew, deep in her bones, that she had let go of something she could never get back. I took one last glance at her before turning away for the final time. Richard would still be inside, trying to salvage his bruised ego, clinging to whatever dignity he had left. The guests would still be whispering about the scene they had just witnessed. And Claudia? Claudia would go back inside that ballroom, smile for the cameras, and play her part as the perfect bride. But tonight, long after the music faded and the guests left, she would lie awake knowing that she had built her perfect life, her perfect empire. And yet, somehow, she had still lost. I walked toward the waiting car, sliding into the back seat as the driver closed the door behind me. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through messages from people who actually mattered. Musicians, old friends, people who had never doubted me. And then, almost on impulse, I opened my music app. I hit record, and in the quiet of the car, as the city blurred past the window, I started playing the melody that had once been Claudia's favorite, For Old Friends and Lessons Learned. Because some memories don't need words. Some lessons don't need to be spoken. And some victories are won in silence. The city lights flickered past in a blur of gold and white as the car cruised through the quiet streets. The weight of the night should have settled by now, but I could still feel the tension lingering in my chest like an unfinished chord. I leaned back against the seat, fingers grazing over the screen of my phone as I scrolled through unread messages. My inbox was full. Congratulatory texts from old friends, amused comments from people who had witnessed the spectacle at the wedding, and even a few industry executives reaching out with offers I had no intention of entertaining. It was strange, the way the past had suddenly resurfaced in one night. I hadn't come to Claudia's wedding expecting a confrontation. I hadn't even come with the intention of proving anything. But life had a funny way of tying up loose ends in its own brutal, poetic fashion. And Claudia? She had received her lesson in respect the hard way. The thought brought a small smirk to my lips, but it quickly faded as my thumb hovered over an old contact in my phone. I stared at the name for a long moment before finally closing the screen. There was no point in looking back now. A soft chime interrupted my thoughts, and I glanced at my screen. Marcus, where the hell did you disappear to? You left before the real fun started. I chuckled, shaking my head before typing a quick response. Me. I figured the entertainment portion of the night was already handled. His reply came almost instantly. Marcus, you should have stayed a little longer. Richard nearly lost his mind after you left. It was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen. I could picture it perfectly. Richard, trying to salvage what little dignity he had left, frantically whispering to Claudia, demanding an explanation, realizing too late that he had just burned a bridge he should have never crossed. I could also imagine the whispers that would haunt them for weeks, if not months. The ex-husband was actually a millionaire? How did they not know? Claudia really downgraded. Huh? And the best part? I didn't even have to lift a finger to orchestrate any of it. I tucked my phone away and glanced out the window. The streets had emptied, the city settling into its quiet late-night rhythm. The car slowed as it approached my building, an understated yet elegant brownstone tucked away from the chaos of the downtown district. Unlike Claudia, I had never needed grand displays of wealth to prove anything. "We're here, sir," the driver said, stepping out to open the door for me. I gave him a nod before stepping onto the pavement, adjusting the cuff of my jacket as I inhaled the crisp night air. As I reached the door, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Leaving without a goodbye? That's cold, man." I turned to see Marcus leaning against his own car, a knowing grin on his face. "You didn't have to chase me down just to say that," I quipped, unlocking my front door. Marcus shoved his hands in his pockets, following me inside like he owned the place. What can I say? I had to see the aftermath for myself. "You made quite an exit back there." I shook my head, tossing my keys onto the table as we entered the living room. The space was simple, warm lighting, dark wood floors, an antique grand piano sitting in the corner. It was a far cry from the cold luxury Claudia had surrounded herself with. Marcus walked over to the piano, running his fingers along the polished surface before whistling. "You know, I always wondered where you ended up," he mused. "Turns out, you ended up on top. Quietly, of course, but still." I shrugged, pulling off my jacket. I never needed an audience. "Could have fooled me," Marcus chuckled. "The way you played them all tonight? That was a damn performance." I smirked, shaking my head. "That wasn't a performance," I corrected. "That was just reality hitting them a little harder than they expected." Marcus laughed, sinking into the couch. "You have no idea how much I've wanted to see Richard taken down a peg. He's been unbearable since day one. The moment Claudia started dating him, it was like he thought he owned the world. That explains why he acted like a complete idiot tonight," I muttered. Marcus nodded. "He's always been insecure. That's why he flaunts his money, why he always has to prove he's the most important person in the room. But you? You walked in without saying a damn word, and suddenly, he was the fool. That's power, my friend." I leaned against the armrest, my fingers absently tapping against my knee. "I didn't do it for power," I said. "I just wanted to remind them that some people don't need validation to be successful." Marcus exhaled, shaking his head with a grin. "And that's exactly why you won tonight." I fell silent, my gaze drifting toward the piano. "You know," Marcus said, leaning back, "Claudia didn't look too happy after you left." I raised a brow. "She's married now. Her happiness isn't my problem." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But let's be real. Tonight wasn't just a wedding for her. It was a statement. She wanted to show you that she had one. But instead, she got the exact opposite." I considered that for a moment, the thought settling into my chest like a final note at the end of a melody. "Maybe," I murmured. Marcus studied me for a long moment before sighing. "Well, if you ever want to rub it in just a little more, I've got plenty of stories about Richard that'll make you laugh." I chuckled, shaking my head. "I think I've done enough damage for one night." Marcus stood, stretching. "Fair enough. But don't be a stranger, all right? Some of us actually enjoy your company." "Noted," I said, walking him to the door. As he stepped out into the night, he turned back with one last smirk. "By the way, that whole 'I'll think about it' line, pure gold. Richard's probably still sweating over it." I laughed, watching as he disappeared down the street. Closing the door behind me, I exhaled deeply. The night had been unexpected, chaotic, a reminder of how far I had come. And yet, I felt lighter. Because now, there were no more ghosts from my past waiting in the shadows. No more unfinished stories. Just me, my music, and the life I had built on my own terms. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in years. There was no lingering weight in my chest, no unresolved emotions clawing at the edges of my mind. The past was exactly where it needed to be, behind me. The sunlight streamed through the curtains of my loft, warming the hardwood floors and casting long, golden streaks across the grand piano in the corner. The instrument had been with me through everything, from the days when I had nothing but a worn-out keyboard to now, when I had built a life far greater than what anyone had expected. As I stretched and pulled myself out of bed, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Marcus. I smirked, shaking my head. Of course, he wouldn't let last night die down just yet. I picked up the call and leaned against the window, watching the city come to life below me. "Please tell me you saw the news," Marcus said, his voice full of barely contained amusement. I raised an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" "Depends," he said. "Are you concerned about the fact that the entire wedding is trending?" I blinked. Trending? What the hell are you talking about? Marcus laughed. "Just check social media. Oh, and before you do, don't say I didn't warn you." I ended the call and immediately pulled up my phone, tapping into one of the news apps I rarely bothered with. And there it was. CEO's wedding becomes a night to remember, for all the wrong reasons. I scrolled further. My curiosity piqued. There were hundreds of posts, all dissecting what had happened last night, from Richard's arrogance to the moment he realized he had insulted the wrong man. One video had already gone viral, a recording of the exact moment I had said, "I'll start by closing my $700 million account at your bank." The caption? "The art of a silent flex." I exhaled, shaking my head in disbelief. I had never sought attention for what I did. I had spent years avoiding the very world that now seemed fascinated with me. And yet, here it was. The internet had caught on, and people were loving the irony. I scrolled further and found comments that ranged from brutal to outright hilarious. "Imagine marrying a man who doesn't even know his wife's ex could buy his company 3 times over. LMAO. Richard, why are you even here?" Him. "Just checking if my money's still safe in your wife's bank." Claudia's face when she realized she fumbled the bag, priceless. I shook my head, placing the phone on the counter. It was strange. For years, Claudia and I had lived completely separate lives, with no overlap, until last night. Now, our names were being spoken together again, but not in the way she had hoped. And I just knew, that she would hate every second of it. The thought made me chuckle as I made my way to the kitchen, brewing a fresh cup of coffee. But just as I took my first sip, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Marcus. It was Claudia. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether I should even bother answering. I had nothing left to say to her. I had walked away last night for a reason. And yet, something about the fact that she was calling me now, after everything, made me curious. I sighed before finally answering. "Claudia." There was silence on the other end. Then, finally a sigh. "I assume you've seen the news?" I smirked. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" She let out a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I leaned against the counter, tilting my head slightly. And how exactly was it supposed to go? She hesitated before responding. I didn't think it would turn into this. I didn't invite you to humiliate you." I scoffed. "No? Then why did Richard feel so comfortable trying to insult me in front of everyone?" She didn't answer right away. "He didn't know who you were," she admitted. I chuckled. That much was obvious. Another pause. "I thought you would have told me, you know." That caught me off guard. "Told you what?" "That you became this." I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. "You never asked, Claudia." She sighed again. "I know." There it was. The regret. Not just for last night. For everything. For walking away. For assuming I would never be anything. For realizing too late that she had been wrong about me. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of an emotional reunion. I had nothing left for her. "I don't know what you expect me to say, Claudia," I said evenly. "But whatever it is, I'm not interested. She let out a slow breath. I figured. Silence stretched between us again, heavier this time. I knew this would be the last time we ever spoke, and somehow I was okay with that. I hope you're happy, she said at last, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. I am, I answered simply, because for the first time in years, I truly meant it. Without another word, I ended the call, placing my phone face down on the counter. And just like that, it was over. No more unfinished business. No more what-ifs. Just me, my music, and the life I had built on my own terms. The past was finally where it belonged. And I was exactly where I needed to be. The silence after the call was different from any I had experienced before. It wasn't heavy or suffocating like unfinished business. It was clean, like the last note of a song played exactly as it was meant to be. I stood there in my kitchen, my coffee now cooling in my hand, realizing something simple but profound. It was over. Not in the way heartbreak lingers. Not in the way some people tell themselves they've moved on but secretly still check old photos in the middle of the night. No, this was truly over. There was nothing left to say, nothing left unresolved. Claudia and I had walked separate paths for years, and last night had been the final crossroads where our worlds collided before splitting apart forever. And somehow, I had been given the last word, not just in conversation, but in the way life had played out. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need Claudia to beg for me back, nor did I need Richard to suffer beyond the public humiliation he had already earned. All I needed was what I already had, a life that was mine and mine alone. With a quiet sigh, I placed my phone down and turned to the one thing that had always made sense: music. My fingers found the smooth keys of the grand piano, and without thinking, I began to play. The melody was soft, almost bittersweet. It wasn't for Claudia, it was for me. A quiet reminder that I had never needed her validation, that I had always been enough, just as I was, that I had never been the one who lost. Halfway through the song, a notification lit up my phone screen. I nearly ignored it, but something told me to look. Marcus had sent me a video. I sighed, shaking my head. Of course he had. I pressed play, and then I laughed. It was a recording from inside the wedding hall after I had left. The camera was shaky, likely taken by someone trying not to get caught, but the audio was crystal clear. Richard stood near the table, his face red with fury, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke to Claudia. What the hell were you thinking, inviting him here? Claudia looked exhausted, her face blank, her fingers massaging her temple. Richard, please. No, don't please me, he snapped. Do you realize what you've done? Do you know how many people were watching? How many of them are laughing at us right now? She exhaled. It wasn't supposed to go like this. Well, it did. Richard practically shouted. And now you've made me look like an idiot. One of his business partners tried to step in, speaking calmly. Richard, maybe we should sit? No, he interrupted, shaking his head. This was supposed to be about us. About me. And instead, I just got humiliated in front of everyone. Marcus's voice appeared in the background, dripping with amusement. Oh, don't take it so personally, Richard. You're just mad because you found out the hard way that you're not the most important man in your wife's life tonight. The audible gasp in the background was pure gold. Richard lost it. You think this is funny? He roared, moving toward Marcus, only for someone to hold him back. That guy, he's nobody. Just because he's got money doesn't mean. You're right, Marcus interrupted smoothly. His money isn't the point. It's the fact that he didn't even have to try to bring you down. He just existed, and it was enough. Richard's face contorted with rage. The video cut off. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. It was perfect. Richard had spent the whole night trying to prove his superiority, only to realize too late that he had never even been in the competition. And Claudia? She had miscalculated everything. I sent a quick text back to Marcus. I hope you know that video made my whole morning. His reply came immediately. Marcus, figured you'd appreciate it. Oh, and in case you were wondering, Richard didn't even sleep at home last night. Guy stormed off in the middle of the night. Classy. Huh? I smirked. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. Marcus responded with a string of laughing emojis before adding, "Marcus, so, what's next for you? Now that your villain origin story is complete?" I chuckled. Me? Nothing changes. I keep playing music, keep living my life. That's all I ever needed. Marcus's reply came slower this time. "Marcus, you really won, didn't you?" I set my phone down, my fingers grazing over the piano keys again. Yeah, I did. Not because I had more money than Richard. Not because I had stolen the show at their wedding. But because I had never been trying to win in the first place. I had just been living. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. With one last deep breath, I placed my hands on the piano and began to play. The notes filled the room, rich and full, echoing through the quiet morning. No cameras, no audience, no expectations, just music, just me. And for the first time in a long time, that was more than enough. The moment I heard my father's voice over the phone, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't just his tone, sharp, direct, and entirely devoid of the usual pleasantries. It was what he said. "We're having a family meeting tomorrow. Your brother will be there too." I gripped my phone tighter, feeling my stomach turn. For years. That's how long it had been since I last saw my brother, the man who stole my wife. The betrayal had left a scar that never truly healed, but I learned to live with it. I buried myself in work, rebuilt my life piece by piece, and convinced myself I had moved on. I told myself that what they did was in the past, that I didn't care anymore. But my father's words told me otherwise. Now, he was back, and so was she. I sat in silence for a moment, the weight of those words pressing down on me. My father didn't call to ask if I wanted to come. He told me. It wasn't a request. It was a summons. I didn't respond right away. My fingers hovered over my phone, my mind screaming at me to decline, to make an excuse. But deep down, I knew I had no choice. Avoiding them forever wasn't realistic, and if my father was calling this meeting, it had to be important. So, with a heavy breath, I forced out a simple response. "I'll be there." The next evening, as I pulled up to my father's house, memories of what happened came rushing back. The driveway, where I once parked beside my brother's car, laughing about stupid things. The porch, where I had stood with my wife, holding her close, thinking we had a lifetime ahead of us. The front door, which I had slammed 4 years ago when I walked away, refusing to look back. And now, I was walking through it again. I stepped inside, my heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. The familiar scent of my father's cigars lingered in the air, mixed with the faintest trace of my mother's old lavender perfume. Though she had been gone for years, some things never changed, but some things did. Because as I walked into the living room, there they were, sitting together, acting like nothing had ever happened. My brother lounged back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the side. His signature smugness was still there, the same arrogance he had always carried. He looked as put together as ever, perfectly pressed shirt, hair styled just right, a watch that cost more than some people's rent. He was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And yet, here he was, sitting across from me, the man who had taken everything from me. And then my eyes landed on her. My ex-wife. She looked at me the way a cat looks at a mouse it has already caught, amused, relaxed, confident that I wasn't a threat. Her eyes scanned me up and down, and then she smiled, as if seeing an old friend instead of the husband she had betrayed. "Still single?" my brother sneered, tilting his head. LOL. I felt my fingers twitch. A small, sharp part of me wanted to lunge across the room and wipe that smug grin off his face, but I forced myself to stay still. And then she laughed. A soft, cruel laugh that made my stomach tighten. "Hey, ugly. Still the same?" I clenched my jaw, inhaling deeply through my nose. I had spent years preparing for this moment, convincing myself that if I ever saw them again, I wouldn't let them get to me, that I had grown beyond their petty jabs. But standing here now, hearing their voices, seeing their faces, it was like no time had passed at all. Before I could speak, my father stood up. The room fell silent instantly. My father was not a man to be interrupted. He had always been the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. There was something about him, his posture, his presence, that commanded attention. "Good timing," he said, his gaze shifting from my brother to me. "I have something important to tell you." His voice was steady, but there was something beneath it. A weight, a finality. I glanced at my brother, and for the first time, I saw his smirk falter. My ex-wife sat up a little straighter, her fingers curling slightly on the armrest. They weren't expecting this. And suddenly I knew. This wasn't just a family meeting. This was something more. My father turned and walked toward his desk, pulling out a thick envelope. He set it down on the table between us with deliberate care. "This is my will." The air in the room changed instantly. I could feel it, thick and heavy, pressing down on all of us. My brother's smirk was gone entirely now, replaced by something else, something uncertain. My ex-wife shifted in her seat, and for the first time since I walked into the house, she didn't look so confident. "Dad," my brother said slowly, his voice no longer carrying its usual arrogance. "Why are we talking about this now?" My father's eyes didn't waver. "Because I don't have time to waste." The words landed with the weight of a hammer. Something cold crept into my stomach. My father had always been strong. He was the kind of man who never let anyone see his weaknesses, never showed a crack in his armor. But now, as I looked at him, I noticed something different. The lines on his face seemed deeper. His frame, though still sturdy, looked thinner than I remembered. And suddenly, I knew. Something was wrong. My brother must have realized it, too, because he sat up straighter, his fingers tightening on the arm of his chair. His eyes flickered between me and our father, searching for answers. But my father didn't give him the chance to ask. "I have something else to tell you," he said, his voice still even, still calm. But there was an edge to it now. I felt it before he even said the words. "I have terminal cancer. 3 months left." Silence. My brother's mouth fell open slightly, but no words came out. My ex-wife's smirk had completely vanished, replaced by something unreadable. For the first time since I walked into this house, neither of them had anything to say. And as I sat there, staring at my father, everything else faded away. The past, the betrayal, the bitterness, it all fell into the background, because none of it mattered anymore. For the first time in 4 years, I wasn't thinking about my brother or my ex-wife. I was thinking about my father, and how much time he had left. I sat in stunned silence, my father's words echoing in my head. 3 months. 3 months to process a reality I wasn't ready for. My father, the strongest man I had ever known, the one who had stood firm through every storm, was dying. I swallowed hard, stealing a glance at my brother. His face was unreadable, but I knew him well enough to recognize the subtle shifts in his expression, the tightening of his jaw, the slight twitch of his fingers. He was calculating, not grieving, not mourning, calculating. And her, my ex-wife, sat beside him, her posture suddenly stiff, her eyes darting between my father and the thick envelope on the table. She wasn't worried about the man who had once treated her like a daughter. She was worried about what this meant for them. I shouldn't have been surprised. My brother had always been the golden child, charming, ambitious, and effortlessly successful. He could do no wrong in my father's eyes when we were younger. The eldest son, the one who was supposed to carry the family name with pride. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the one who worked hard but was always overshadowed. And then he took the one thing that mattered most, my wife. She and I had built a life together. We had plans, dreams, a future I thought was unshakable. I believed we were happy. But behind my back, they had been sneaking around, whispering their lies, building their own future while I remained oblivious. I found out the hard way. I still remember the night everything fell apart. It had been an ordinary evening, or so I thought. I had made dinner reservations at her favorite restaurant, planning to surprise her after a long day at work. I walked into that dimly lit restaurant, scanning the tables, expecting to find my wife waiting for me. Instead, I found her hand in hand with my brother. Their laughter cut through the air like a blade, casual and intimate, the kind that came from familiarity, from love. My feet felt rooted to the ground, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. But then, as if sensing my presence, she turned. And she didn't even flinch. No guilt, no shock, just a lazy, amused smile. "Did you really not know?" she asked, tilting her head, her voice dripping with condescension. Everyone else noticed. And my brother? He simply sighed, setting his glass down with the same indifference he had always carried. "It's over. Let's not make this dramatic." Dramatic, as if my entire world hadn't just shattered in a single second. The divorce was brutal, not just because of the legalities, but because of the sheer humiliation. My brother married her within months. Together, they flaunted their new life. Luxury vacations, extravagant dinners, an expensive house that should have been mine. I walked away with nothing but my dignity, and even that had taken a hit. And now, for years later, they were sitting in my father's house, acting like they still owned the world. But something told me this time would be different. I exhaled, shaking off the past as I refocused on the present. My father cleared his throat, his gaze locking onto my brother. "There's something you need to understand," he said, voice calm but firm. My brother tensed slightly. "I built this family's wealth from nothing. I sacrificed, I worked, I bled to make sure you both had everything you needed. But there's a difference between needing something and feeling entitled to it." The room was suffocatingly silent. My brother let out a small, forced chuckle. "Dad, come on. This isn't necessary." "Don't interrupt me," my father cut in sharply. I watched as my brother's jaw clenched, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. He wasn't used to being shut down. He had always had a way of twisting things to work in his favor, manipulating situations to make himself look like the victim. But not this time. "You betrayed your own blood," my father continued. "You humiliated your brother, you took what wasn't yours, and you did it with a smile on your face." My brother's smirk faltered. My father leaned forward, his next words slow and deliberate. "You don't deserve a damn thing." My brother sat up straighter, his entire demeanor shifting. His wife's fingers curled against the armrest, her face growing tight with restrained anger. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice sharper than before. My father didn't blink. "It means you're both in for a very rude awakening." I didn't say a word. I just watched. For years, I had lived with the pain of their betrayal. For years, I had told myself that karma didn't exist, that people like them always got away with their sins. But sitting here now, watching the first cracks of panic creep into their expressions, I realized something. I had been wrong, and they were about to learn what it felt like to lose everything. The silence in the room was suffocating, pressing down on all of us like a heavy weight. My father's words had hit like a hammer, shattering the illusion my brother and his wife had built for themselves. "You don't deserve a damn thing." I saw the flicker of uncertainty in my brother's eyes, the tightening of his jaw as he processed what had just been said. His wife, usually the picture of arrogance, shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers tapping against her thigh in restless agitation. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. For years, I had carried the weight of their betrayal, had suffered the humiliation, the anger, the pain. But now, as I sat across from them, watching the first hints of fear creep into their perfect, controlled expressions, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Satisfaction. My father leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving my brother's face. "Before we go any further, let's talk about something important," he said, pulling out a thick envelope from the desk beside him. I glanced at my brother, watching as his hands curled into fists. He knew exactly what was in that envelope. We both did. My father's will. And that meant one thing. He wasn't just here to lecture us. He was here to set things in stone. My father set the envelope down on the table with deliberate care. "I want you to know exactly where my assets are going," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "Because some of you seem to think you have rights to things you don't deserve." I watched as my brother swallowed hard. His wife's smirk was long gone now, replaced by something colder, something calculating. "Wait, Dad, why are we talking about this now?" My brother finally spoke, his voice tight. My father exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "Because I don't have time to waste," he said, and then the words that changed everything. "I have terminal cancer. 3 months left." The air in the room seemed to vanish. My brother's back straightened so fast it was as if someone had yanked a cord in his spine. His wife's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening. Not with grief, not with sadness, but with sheer, raw shock. I felt my stomach tighten. I had suspected something was wrong. The weight in my father's voice, the way his clothes fit a little looser, the tiredness in his eyes. Signs I should have noticed earlier. But hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that knocked the breath from my lungs. 3 months. That was all the time I had left with the only parent I had. "You never told us this," my brother muttered, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. My father didn't blink. I didn't feel the need to. "But now that you're here, let's discuss what really matters." He walked over to his desk, pulled out another stack of documents, and laid them in front of us. "These are records of all my financial transactions, my will, and something else." He paused, his gaze sharp. "Records of what happened 4 years ago." I frowned. What was he talking about? My father tapped his finger on one of the documents. "Do you know where you were when your mother was sick?" A sick feeling crawled up my spine. Our mother, kind, loving, and always putting family first, had passed away shortly after my brother's betrayal. I had been too consumed by my own pain to notice much at the time, but I knew she had spent her last months in and out of hospitals, growing weaker with each passing day. My brother scoffed, shaking his head. "Dad, come on. What does this have to do with anything?" My father ignored him. "These are bank statements," he continued. "You two received money from me for her medical care, $5,000 a month." I watched as my brother's face twitched. A slow, creeping redness spread across his skin. "But there's a problem," my father continued, his voice cold. "No payments were ever made." The silence was deafening. My ex-wife stiffened. My father didn't stop there. He pulled his laptop closer, clicked a few keys, and then turned the screen toward us. "There's more," he said, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. A video began playing. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then, as the grainy footage became clearer, realization hit me like a punch to the gut. A timestamp, a location, and then my brother and his wife. The footage was from 4 years ago. The night our mother was struggling for breath in her hospital bed. They weren't with her. They weren't even home. They were at a luxury hotel, laughing, drinking, celebrating. The room felt like it had dropped in temperature. I turned to my brother, waiting for some kind of explanation, some pathetic excuse. But for the first time in his life, he didn't have one. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, his face going from red to pale in a matter of seconds. His wife grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. This is ridiculous," she sputtered, her voice just a little too high, a little too defensive. My father tilted his head. "Is it?" My brother slammed his hands against the table, his voice rising. "You think this changes anything? What do you want from me, Dad? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. Are we done now?" My father's expression remained unreadable. "No," he said simply. "We're far from done." I let out a slow breath, my mind racing. For years, I had believed that my brother and his wife had taken everything from me. But as I sat there, watching them unravel under my father's quiet, unrelenting judgment, I realized something. They weren't as untouchable as they thought. And this was only the beginning. The weight of my father's words settled over the room like a thick fog, suffocating and inescapable. My brother had always been good at talking his way out of trouble, twisting stories to make himself look like the victim. But now, he was speechless. For once in his life, he had no control over the narrative. I glanced at my father, who remained calm, his fingers resting lightly on the stack of documents in front of him. He had always been a man of few words, never one to waste time on theatrics. When he spoke, people listened. And right now, my brother and his wife were terrified. "You abandoned your own mother for money," my father said, his voice eerily even. "And then, as if that wasn't enough, you stole from me." I turned back to my brother, watching as his face twisted with something between panic and fury. "That's not true," he said through gritted teeth. "I don't know where you're getting this, but don't lie to me." My father's voice was sharp enough to cut through steel. He clicked a button on his laptop, and another set of images popped up on the screen. Bank statements, transactions, proof of extravagant spending that lined up perfectly with the months my mother had been sick. Thousands of dollars withdrawn from my father's account, money that was meant for her medical care. And where had it gone instead? Shopping sprees, luxury hotels, 5-star dinners. My ex-wife let out a breath, shifting in her seat. "This is ridiculous. What are you even trying to prove here?" My father didn't even look at her. "That I was blind," he said. "Blind to what you two really were." My brother let out a hollow laugh, shaking his head. "Come on, Dad. It's not like you're hurting for money. We didn't. You let your mother die alone." The words slammed into the room like a gunshot. I felt my chest tighten, my hands curling into fists at my sides. My mother had deserved better. She had deserved to know that the son she had loved unconditionally wasn't off spending her medical funds on cocktails and luxury resorts. But she never got that, because my brother had made sure of it. I had been drowning in my own grief, my own heartbreak, and I had assumed that they were too, that they were just as devastated, just as lost. But now, as I sat here, watching them, I realized they had never mourned at all. They had been celebrating, and something inside me snapped. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice low. "Whatever you spent that money on, was it worth it?" My brother shot me a glare. "Don't start." "No, I want to know." I leaned forward, staring directly into his eyes. "When Mom was in that hospital bed, struggling for every breath, were you happy? Were you laughing? Were you toasting to your new life while she was gasping for air?" "Shut up," he snapped. My ex-wife shifted again, avoiding my gaze. For the first time, she wasn't smirking, wasn't taunting me with that cruel little smile. Because even she knew there was no excuse for this. My father exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples as if this entire conversation was draining what little energy he had left. "I'm done talking," he said finally. "The facts are right in front of you. I know what you did, and now you're going to face the consequences." A thick, tense silence followed, and then my brother laughed. A short, humorless sound. "Consequences?" he scoffed. "What are you going to do? Cut me off? I'll be fine, Dad. You think I need your money?" My father just watched him. "Oh, I know you need it." My brother's smirk faltered, and then, without a word, my father picked up his will, the single document that held the power to decide our futures. He turned it over in his hands before finally setting it down in front of me. "Every last cent I have," he said, his voice steady, "is going to him." The room froze. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. I blinked, staring down at the papers, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. My brother, however, had no trouble understanding. He shot to his feet so fast his chair nearly toppled over. "What?" My father didn't so much as flinch. "You heard me. No, this is a joke, right?" My brother's voice rose in pitch, the panic bleeding through. His wife's head snapped toward him, her nails digging into his arm. "You can't do this," she hissed. My father raised an eyebrow. "Can't I?" My brother's hand slammed onto the table. "You can't just take everything and give it to him." His face twisted with rage as he turned to me, eyes burning. "He doesn't deserve it." I tilted my head. "Why? Because I didn't steal it from you first?" His jaw clenched. His wife shook her head furiously, her carefully maintained composure crumbling. "We'll fight this," she snapped. We'll get a lawyer. You're welcome to try, my father interrupted, but you won't win. His voice was final, unshakable, and I realized, with a quiet sense of satisfaction, that this was it. The empire my brother had built on lies and stolen wealth was crumbling around him, and this time, there was nothing he could do to stop it. I sat back in my chair, watching as the panic settled into their faces. I had spent years thinking that justice would never come, that I would live the rest of my life knowing that they had taken everything from me and gotten away with it. But now, the tables had turned, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The silence after my father's words was thick, suffocating. My brother stood frozen, his body rigid with disbelief, while his wife's hand clutched his arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This isn't happening," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, but it was happening. For the first time in his life, my brother wasn't getting what he wanted, and he couldn't handle it. "Dad, you can't be serious," my brother finally spoke, his voice cracking with something dangerously close to desperation. "You're really going to throw me away? Your own son?" My father exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his forehead. For a moment, he looked tired in a way I had never seen before. But when he spoke, his voice was as steady as ever. "You threw yourself away the moment you decided to betray this family," he said. "You made your choices. Now, you live with them." My brother shook his head violently. No, this isn't right." He turned to me, eyes burning with resentment. "You think you deserve this?" His voice was sharp, accusatory. "You're nothing. You've always been nothing, and Dad's just doing this to punish me." I let out a slow breath, meeting his glare with calm indifference. "If that's what helps you sleep at night," his wife finally snapped, slamming her hands on the table. "Enough!" she shouted, her carefully maintained mask of control shattering. "You think you can just take everything from us? You think we're going to walk away with nothing?" My father's gaze hardened. "That's exactly what I think." I watched as the realization truly hit them. My brother, who had always lived in luxury, always had things handed to him without ever lifting a finger, was now facing nothing. And for the first time, he had no way out. "This isn't over," he hissed, voice shaking with rage. "I swear to God, I'll fight this." My father nodded, utterly unfazed. "Then you'll waste the little money you have left on lawyers who will tell you the same thing I just did. You have nothing." I could see the veins in my brother's neck bulging, his hands clenched into trembling fists. His wife looked no better. Her breathing was uneven, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palm. They had built their lives on stealing. Stealing from me. Stealing from my father. Stealing from my mother. And now, they had nothing left to take. The satisfaction that rolled through me was something I couldn't put into words. My father slowly stood, his presence commanding the room in a way only he could. "There's one more thing," he said. My brother swallowed, clearly dreading whatever was coming next. My father pulled out another document and set it on the table. "These are copies of the financial transactions. The ones showing that you stole from me." My brother didn't move. He barely breathed. "If you fight this, I will take them to the authorities," my father said, his voice quiet but filled with absolute certainty. "And you will spend the rest of your life paying for what you've done." My brother's face drained of color. His wife gasped, turning to him with wide eyes. "Wait, what?" she whispered, grabbing his arm. "Tell me he's lying." He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. My father crossed his arms. "So here's your choice," he said. "You can leave here right now, accept that you've lost, and never come back. Or..." He leaned forward slightly. "You can fight me, and I will make sure you regret it." The threat hung in the air, thick and heavy. And then, for the first time, my brother broke. His shoulders sagged, the fire in his eyes dying out. He knew. He had lost. His wife, however, wasn't ready to give up. "We'll take legal action." "Shut up," my brother snapped at her, his voice hollow, defeated. She recoiled, her eyes widening. "Excuse me?" He didn't look at her. "Just shut up." My father exhaled, shaking his head. "That's what I thought." Without another word, My brother pushed back from the table and stood up. His movements were slow, heavy, as if he had aged 10 years in just a few minutes. His wife stared at him in disbelief, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "That's it? You're just going to take this?" He didn't answer. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You're a joke?" I watched as something flickered in his expression. Hurt. Shame. But he didn't argue. Because deep down, he knew. This was the end. Without another word, my father reached for his glass of water, took a slow sip, and then nodded toward the door. "You can leave now." My brother clenched his jaw, his entire body vibrating with anger. But he didn't argue. He didn't fight. Instead, he turned and walked away. His wife scrambled after him, heels clicking against the floor. I let out a slow breath, feeling something inside me unravel. For years, I had carried the weight of their betrayal. For years, I had told myself that justice didn't exist, that they would always win, always land on their feet. But now, I was the one standing tall. And as they walked out that door, I knew I would never have to look back. The door slammed shut behind them, the sound echoing through the house like a final nail in a coffin. My brother and his wife were gone. For good. I sat there, staring at the empty space where they had been, feeling an odd, unfamiliar sensation settle over me. It wasn't just relief. It was freedom. For years, I had lived under the weight of what they had done to me. The betrayal, the humiliation, the injustice. It had consumed me, eaten away at me in ways I hadn't even realized until now. I had told myself that time had healed me, that I had moved on. But it wasn't time that healed wounds. It was justice. And justice had just been served. I exhaled slowly, turning to my father. He was still sitting, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest of his chair, his expression unreadable. The strength in his posture was still there, but there was something else too. Fatigue. 3 months. That was all we had left. I felt my throat tighten. "Dad." He looked at me, his eyes softer now. "You did well," he said simply. I let out a hollow laugh. "I didn't do anything." He shook his head. "You didn't lose yourself. Not like he did." I frowned. "I almost did." He nodded, as if he had always known that. I glanced back at the door, my mind still replaying the look on my brother's face as he realized it was over. For so long, he had been untouchable, the golden child, the one who always landed on his feet. But now, his world was falling apart, and I wasn't going to stop it. The fallout begins. The first cracks appeared within a week. It started with the money, or rather, the lack of it. Without my father's financial backing, my brother found himself struggling immediately. The house, the cars, the lavish lifestyle he and his wife had built weren't maintained by hard work. They were maintained by handouts. And now, the handouts were gone. I got the first call 3 days later. I let it ring, then another. Ignored it. By the 4th day, he tried a different tactic, a message. "We need to talk." No explanation, no apology, just 4 meaningless words. I deleted it. Cracks in the perfect marriage. A week later, my father and I were having lunch when the first real piece of news came in. My father's lawyer had called with an update. My brother's wife had tried to contest the will. Tried, and failed. The look on my father's face when he heard was one of complete and utter amusement. She really thought that would work? I smirked. She never could accept reality, and reality was crashing down on her. It wasn't just the money. It was the public perception. For years, my brother and his wife had built their image around wealth, success, and power. They had flaunted it online, bragged about it to their friends, acted like they were superior to everyone else. Now, people were watching them crumble, and as the money dried up, so did their marriage. 2 weeks after the will was finalized, I got another message. This one was from her. "He's ruining us. Do you really want to see your own brother like this?" I stared at the words, letting them sink in. Ruining us. Not ruining himself. Ruining them. Because, of course, in her mind, this was never about his mistakes. Never about the choices they made. It was about who was left to blame. And for the first time, she was realizing that my brother had nothing left to offer. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The collapse. By the time a month had passed, my brother was completely unrecognizable. The company he worked for, one that our father had helped him get into, let him go after his financial troubles became public. Turns out, executives don't take too kindly to fraud when it's splashed across legal documents. His wife? She left him. I don't know when or how, but one day, she just vanished. She deleted her social media accounts, cut ties with mutual friends, disappeared into whatever hole she had crawled out of. And my brother? He was alone. The last message he sent me came exactly 5 weeks after the meeting at my father's house. Are you happy now? I stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about everything. About the betrayal, the years of pain, the anger, the nights I had spent wondering why I was the one who lost everything. And now, looking at his message, I realized something. I wasn't happy, because happiness had nothing to do with him anymore. I had my father. I had my peace. I had my freedom. So, instead of replying, I did the one thing I should have done years ago. I deleted his number, and I moved on. The storm didn't just hit my brother's life. It devastated it. Over the next few months, I watched from a distance as everything he had built on lies and stolen opportunities collapsed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel pity for him. Because the truth was, he did this to himself. The financial freefall. My brother had always lived a life of excess. Expensive vacations, designer suits, first-class flights. He was the type of man who never checked price tags because he never had to. Until now, without my father's support, he was drowning. The house, the mansion, was the first to go. The bank seized it faster than he could fight back. Turns out, living on credit and empty promises only works when you have someone else's money to back it up. Then came the cars, the ones he had driven just to show off. The ones he had taken pictures with, captioning them with "Success isn't given, it's earned." Now, gone. Repossession notices. Frozen accounts. A rapid descent from power to nothingness. And the best part? It was all public. The same social circles that once worshipped him were now whispering behind his back. The same people who had toasted champagne with him were now laughing at him. And he couldn't stand it. The divorce. But his biggest loss? Her. His golden trophy. My ex-wife. The woman he stole from me, convinced that life would be better with her by his side. She had stuck around for as long as she could. Maybe she thought the money would magically reappear. Maybe she assumed my father would have a change of heart and fix everything. But when the reality of being broke sank in, so did she. One day, she was there, demanding solutions, insisting that my brother do something. And the next, she was gone. Left him just as easily as she had left me. No warning, no farewell, just disappearance. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that she had moved out and filed for divorce within weeks. Took whatever small assets were still in her name and vanished into a new life. She had bet on the wrong man, and now she was looking for another one to save her. But my brother? He had nothing left to offer. Rock bottom. 3 months after my father cut him off, my brother reached his lowest point. I heard the rumors. How he was desperately trying to borrow money from anyone who would listen. How he had resorted to selling everything he still owned just to pay off debts. How no one wanted to help him. The mighty had fallen, and no one cared. And then, one evening, I got a call. A number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Then a text. Please, just pick up. I stared at the screen for a long time. I knew exactly who it was. And I knew exactly what he wanted. Money. A second chance. A lifeline. And for a split second, I felt something. Not guilt, not sympathy, but a strange, distant sadness. Because once upon a time, before all of this, he had been my brother, and I had loved him. But that was a lifetime ago. So, instead of responding, I did what I should have done years ago. I deleted the message, and I never looked back. The day of my father's funeral arrived with a gray, overcast sky, as if the world itself was mourning. The past few months had been a whirlwind, watching my brother's downfall, finalizing legal matters, and most importantly, spending every moment I could with my father. I had done my best to make his last days peaceful. We sat together in the evenings, reminiscing about old stories. He never spoke much about my brother after the will was finalized. He had made his decision and had no regrets. His focus was on me, on making sure I was prepared to carry on the family legacy. And then, just like that, he was gone. I stood by his grave, hands clenched at my sides as the priest spoke, his voice a dull hum in the background. The funeral was small, family, a few old friends, business associates who had respected my father. But I knew there was one presence I had been dreading. And then, I saw him. My brother. He stood a few yards away, not close enough to be part of the gathering, but not far enough to be unnoticed. He looked like a ghost of the man he used to be. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by something much more modest. His hair, always perfectly styled, was unkempt. He had lost weight, the arrogance stripped away from his posture, and for the first time in our lives, he looked truly alone. I turned back toward the casket, inhaling sharply as it was lowered into the ground. My father had always been my anchor, my quiet source of strength. And now, I had to face the world without him. When the service ended, people began to trickle away, offering their condolences before departing. I kept my gaze forward, refusing to acknowledge my brother's presence. But I knew he was waiting for a chance to talk to me. And sure enough, as soon as the crowd had thinned, I heard his voice. "We need to talk." I closed my eyes briefly before turning to face him. "There's nothing left to say." He hesitated, shifting on his feet. I didn't think he would actually cut me off. His voice was raw, almost hoarse. I thought he was bluffing. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. "That's the problem. You never thought anything through. You always assumed there would be someone there to clean up your mess." His jaw clenched. "You don't understand how hard things have been." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Hard?" I took a step toward him. "Hard is losing everything because of you. Hard is trying to rebuild my life from scratch while you lived in luxury. Hard is burying the only parent who still cared about me while you stood at a distance, too much of a coward to even say goodbye to him." He flinched, his shoulders sagging. No, I cut him off. "There's no apology that fixes this." He swallowed hard, looking down at the ground. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I stared at him for a long moment. I could see it now, the genuine regret, the loss. But it didn't matter anymore. Some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals can't be undone. I took a slow breath and looked him in the eyes one last time. "Goodbye." And then, I walked away. I didn't look back. And for the first time in 4 years, I felt free. The weeks following my father's funeral were quieter than I expected. No more tense conversations, no more unexpected phone calls, no more looming presence of my brother trying to claw his way back into my life. It was just me now. And for the first time in years, I wasn't living in someone else's shadow. I spent most of my time at my father's house, the house that was now mine. It still felt strange, walking through the halls of my childhood, knowing that everything here belonged to me alone. I had spent so long being the forgotten son, the one left behind while my brother took center stage. Now, it was his turn to disappear. I hadn't heard from him since the funeral. Part of me wondered if he had finally accepted that there was no way back, that the damage he had done was irreparable. Or maybe he had just given up. Either way, it didn't matter anymore, because I had no intention of looking for him. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, not just my father's estate, but my own peace of mind, the house that held memories. At first, it was difficult being in the house alone. Every room held memories, echoes of the past whispering through the walls. My mother's old reading chair by the fireplace. My father's study, where I used to watch him work late into the night. Even the dining room, where so many family dinners had taken place, before it all fell apart. But little by little, I started making it mine. I redecorated, replaced old furniture, cleared out the things that no longer held meaning, keeping only what truly mattered. It was my home now, and for the first time, I could breathe, letting go of the past. One afternoon, as I sorted through my father's belongings, I came across a photo album I hadn't seen in years. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to face what lay inside. But as I flipped through the pages, I found myself smiling. There we were, my father, my mother, and me. Long before the betrayals, before the bitterness, before my brother had stolen something that was never his to take. It reminded me that there had been good times, that my entire life hadn't been shaped by loss. And that realization? It was freeing, because for the longest time, I had let anger define me, but I didn't have to anymore. A future of my own. With the estate settled, I finally allowed myself to think about what came next. For so long, I had been caught up in the past. What my brother did, what my ex-wife took from me, what I lost. But now, I was in control. I had the resources, the time, and most importantly, the clarity to move forward. And I wasn't going to waste it. I started making plans, expanding my business, traveling, doing all the things I had put on hold while drowning in betrayal. Because this was my life now, and I was ready to start living it. The sun was setting as I stood on the back porch of my father's house. My house now. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink, stretching endlessly across the horizon. The wind carried the scent of freshly cut grass, and for the first time in years, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Peace. The last few months had been a storm, a relentless hurricane of betrayal, loss, and reckoning. But now, as I stood here, staring at the vast land my father had built with his own 2 hands, I realized something. I had survived. And not just survived, I had won. Not in the way my brother would have defined it. To him, winning had always been about power, about taking from others to elevate himself. But my victory was different. I was free. I had no more unfinished battles, no more debts to pay, no more ghosts of the past whispering in my ear. I had walked through the fire, endured every loss, and come out the other side, stronger, reclaiming myself. That night, I sat at the dining table, sipping a glass of whiskey, reflecting on everything that had led me here. I had spent years in the shadow of my brother's betrayal, feeling like a fool for trusting the people who had turned on me so easily. I had spent years questioning if I was too weak, too blind to see it coming. But now, I realized it wasn't my failure. It was theirs. They had destroyed themselves. I had simply endured. A life of my own choosing. For the first time in forever, I wasn't living in reaction to someone else's choices. I wasn't rebuilding my life because of what they had done. I was building it because I wanted to. I had the money, the freedom, and the clarity to go anywhere, do anything. The house was mine. The business was thriving. And there was no one left to hold me back. And it felt good. No more looking over my shoulder. No more waiting for the past to catch up with me. No more wondering if my brother would ever change. He wouldn't. And it no longer mattered. The final closure. One morning, I received an email. From him. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. It was short. I lost everything. I don't know where to go from here. If you ever cared about me, even a little, you'll help me. Please. I sat there, rereading the words, waiting to feel something. Anger, sadness, regret. But there was nothing, because I had finally let go. I didn't respond. I simply deleted it. And as I walked out into the bright morning sun, feeling its warmth on my skin, I smiled. Because I was finally, truly, free.